The U.S.S. Texas is a dreadnought battleship. She was the first of two New York-class style battleships authorized on June 24, 1910. The U.S.S. New York, the lead ship in the class, was designated BB-35. The cost for the U.S.S. Texas would be $5,830,000. The contract for the ship was signed on December 17, 1910, and the plans would be delivered on December 24th. The ship would be named in honor of the state of Texas, and her keel would be laid down on April 17th of 1911 at the Newport News shipbuilding yards. The Texas was launched on May 18th, 1912, and would be sponsored by Miss Claudia Lyon, who was the daughter of Colonel Cecil Lyon, who was then the Republican National Committeeman from Texas. She would be commissioned on March 12, 1914, and her first captain would be Captain Albert W. Grant. At the time of her launch, she weighed 28,822 tons with a full load. She is 573 feet long with a beam of 95 feet. Her draft is 29 feet 7 inches with a full load. She is a double-screw vessel which is propelled by two triple-expansion steam engines. The Texas has a top speed of 21 knots, and the ship has an operating range of 8,125 miles while cruising at 10 knots. The U.S.S. Texas would have a complement of 1,042 officers and enlisted men. Her armament would include 14-inch 356mm 45 caliber guns. These guns could fire 1,400-pound armor-piercing shells to a range of 13 miles. She also had 21 5-inch 127mm 51 caliber guns, 4 3-pounder 47mm 1.85-inch 40 caliber guns, 2 1-pounder 37mm 1.46-inch guns, and 4 21-inch 533mm torpedo tubes, which were below her waterline. Her armor would include 6 to 12 inches or 152 to 305mm steel belt. She would have 10 to 11-inch bulkheads or 254 to 279mm. Her barbettes were made 5 to 12 inches of steel or 127mm to 305mm. The ship's turrets are 14 inches or 356mm in face thickness, and her decks are between 1.5 inches to 3 inches, or 38 to 76mm, and her conning tower is 12 inches thick. In May, she steamed to Veracruz to support the occupation of that Mexican city. Regular operations with the Atlantic Fleet began in mid-year and continued to January of 1918. The ship entered World War I after crossing the ocean to join the Grand Fleet in the North Sea. She arrived in Scapa Flow, Scotland on February 11th. She would then spend the next 9 months reinforcing the British blockade of Germany, and her last duties of the war would come on November 21st, which was 10 days after the announcement of the armistice. She would help to escort the surrendered High Seas Fleet to Scapa Flow for internment. The U.S.S. Texas returned to the United States in late December of 1918, and again took up duties in the Atlantic Fleet. Reassigned to the Pacific Fleet in mid-1919, she would be designated BB-35 in 1920. The U.S.S. Texas come back to the Atlantic in 1924, when she again visited Europe on a training cruise. She would be refit again from the years from 1925 to 1927 at Norfolk Navy Yards. Her 14 original coal-fired boilers will be replaced with 6 oil-fired boilers. Her cage masts, a distinct characteristic of the class of ship, would be replaced with tripod masts. Also, an aircraft catapult will be installed on the midship turret, which was turret number 3. Thin-walled tanks called torpedo blisters were added to the ship's hull, After this modernization, she would become the flagship of the entire U.S. fleet and serve under such flag until 1931. After her refit, operations would alternate between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans until 1931. Then her base was shifted to California, and for the next 6 years, she would serve as a fleet and division flagship during the regular United States fleet exercises. She briefly revisited the Atlantic in 1936, but would be stationed there in 1937 for service that would last until late 1944. From the years 1937 through 1939, she would serve as a training vessel for naval officers and men. When World War II began in September of 1939, the U.S.S. Texas joined the other Atlantic Squadron ships in maintaining a neutrality patrol, which was an active patrol that became increasingly warlike when the U.S. Navy began convoying Western Atlantic shipping in 1941. On December 7, 1941, the United States was attacked at Pearl Harbor by Japan. At the time, the U.S.S. Texas was in Casco Bay, Maine. She was preparing to go on another neutrality patrol in the northern Atlantic Ocean, and that would be for watching for German U-boats. But she would leave for her first wartime patrol shortly after, escorting a convoy of merchant ships to Iceland. She would continue convoy duty through the spring and summer of 1942. Then she would assemble and join the forces for Operation Torch. She fought at the Battle of Port Leyte as flagship to Rear Admiral Monroe Kelly from November 8th through the 11th of 1942. After returning to convoy duty for most of 1943, the U.S.S. Texas and her crew spent the spring of 1944 in preparation for a major operation. On May 29, 1944, the crew was informed that they would participate in the Great Crusade. This was an operation made for the liberation of France. She would serve as flagship of the Omaha Beach area for Rear Admiral Carleton Bryant during the invasion of Normandy, or better known as D-Day. In April of 1944, she began preparations for the Normandy landings. These would begin on June 6, 1944. Her guns would fire on German positions on the beach for several days. Then on June 25th, she would participate in the bombardment of Cherbourg, France, during which she was hit twice by enemy fire from the coastline. She would then be active in August, this time in the Mediterranean Sea, in support of the landings in southern France. The U.S.S. Texas would receive an overhaul in 1945. The upgrades would change her characteristics. She would now have a complement of 1,810 officers and enlisted men. She would have 2 SG surface search radars, 1 SK air search radar, 2 Mk3 fire control radars, and 2 Mk10 fire control radar systems. She would also receive 10 quad 40mm Bofors AA guns and 44 single 20mm Oerlikon AA guns. She would also have 1.75 inches or 44mm added to the turret tops for additional armor. The ship would also be equipped with 2 OS-2U Kingfisher airplanes, as well as a catapult. After the overhaul, the U.S.S. Texas went to the Pacific Fleet, arriving in the war zone in time to take part in the February 1945 invasion of Iwo Jima. From late March to late May, she would operate off Okinawa, firing against Japanese positions and helping to fight off suicide plane attacks. She was preparing for the invasion of Japan when the war ended in 1945 in August. She left the Western Pacific in late September and spent the next 3 months transporting veterans home. Returning to the Atlantic coast in February of 1946, the U.S.S. Texas was inactive until April of 1948, where she was placed out of commission and turned over to the state of Texas. She has been maintained as a memorial at San Jacinto ever since. The battleship U.S.S. Texas is now a national landmark, as well as being registered as a historic place. As of this writing, which is July 7, 2023, the U.S.S. Texas is currently in dry dock receiving repairs. As of June 25, 2023, the ship has been receiving repair work on the following areas. We start with the repairs to the torpedo blisters. The torpedo blister modules are produced in the fabrication shop and are transported to the dock where they will be attached to the ship's hull. There are currently 3 more torpedo blister modules under construction in the shop. The new torpedo blisters are a slightly different design and square off at the bottom just below the waterline. This design change will make the new blisters easier to maintain and increase their longevity. Moving on to the coating, the inside of the blisters in the ship's hull will be coated to protect against possible corrosion from seawater. Moving on to the hull, as the work continues moving aft, any holes in the ship and the original hull are being repaired. New plates are added to the thinner areas, and the smaller holes are welded shut. The ship's hull is being primed temporarily as the repairs are made along the way. Going to the stern, the new plating continues being placed onto the ship's stern. As the new plates go on, they are welded to the repairs framing done while at the ship was still at San Jacinto Battleground State Historic Site, and this was from 2013 when it started through 2014. Next is the leak testing. All the welds are being tested for leaks. This is done via vacuum box, the dye penetrant or magnetic flux depending on the area. The deck repairs, the workers have begun repairing the decks on the ship's original bridge. They will work their way up to the ship's foremast, repairing everything from holes to corroded areas as needed. The gun shields. They have been cutting down the gun shields surrounding the midship with their 20mm guns to make them more accurate. These were installed in 1988 and 1989 and are taller than they were in 1945. The repairs made to the ship during this time will assure that this historic ship will be around to be admired by future generations as a historical landmark, and hopefully she'll be given the honor that she deserves.